But now I want to take you to a rather mind-blowing story, and I mean that very literally, because it involves a streamer who managed to beat Elden Ring using her mind. So Perrikaryal is a UK Twitch streamer who's made headlines this week after using electroencephalography, oh god, that was a hard one to say, or EEG, to beat Elden Ring. So her movement was controlled with a controller, but every action, every attack, every potion was done purely with her mind. So she beat the final boss, and let's take a look at that winning moment. Now, I am very excited to say that I'm joined by Perri. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. That was such a glowing introduction. I'm chuffed.
Oh, no worries. I just loved there was such intense concentration there during that whole clip, which, I mean, makes sense, right? Because you're literally using your mind.
I think it's the most serious I've ever felt, ever. It was, and I had an audience of however many people, and I just totally blocked them all off, and I was just stoic for for a good 10 minutes. It was terrible stream content, but worth it.
No, I think it was amazing, but that's the thing. It's hard enough to do that by itself, but not the added pressure of having loads and loads of people watching you, cheering you on at the same time. So, you've streamed this whole journey, and you've just managed to beat Elden Ring. How was it, finally achieving that?
So much relief. So much relief. I didn't think that it would be possible. Like when I started it, it was an idea I had in my head. Oh, let's just try Dark Souls. Why not? This will never work. And then within the first stream, I had beaten Margit, and I was like, okay, fine, but how far could I get with this realistically? And then we just kept doing it, and it just kept working. And then and then eventually, I was like, oh, okay, let's really go all in on this. And then it's done.
You've done it. I mean, obviously Elden Ring's a big game anyway. How long did it take you to do it, playing with your mind?
The play file was about 200 hours, I think. But then I did maybe twice that, trying to do all the training for the EEG and everything. So the whole project took a long time.
Yeah, no, a lot of people watching are going to be, obviously you have the movement with the controller, but are going to be wondering how the hell that you actually managed to pull this off. So can you kind of talk us through the setup here, like what you actually used to do this?
Absolutely. So this is the EEG headset. I worked with these a lot during my master's degree, but usually they're this massive cap that goes on your head, and they've got a million wires coming off them into this massive machine. But I didn't know, and I'm sure a lot of people don't know, that you can get personal use little Bluetooth ones like this. It's crazy. And this basically, all it does is these little electrodes here, they sit on your scalp and they pick up electrical activity coming off your brain. And then it can build a picture of your kind of electrical activity, the frequency of it, how much of it there is, and where. And that's what I call a pattern of brain activity. So it records those. And then all I did using they call it a brain-computer interface. Using that, you can make it remember certain patterns of brain activity when you're doing different things. So your pattern of brain activity looks different depending on what you're doing. Me talking to you right now is going to be very different from me staring off into the distance or something else. So when I, for instance, imagined pushing something forward, that pattern was remembered by this software, and then over a certain threshold of it recognizing that pattern, that's key binded to my attack.
I see.
And another was me imagining spinning a plate round and round to the tune of "You spin me right round, baby, right round," because it has to be the exact same visualization. It has to be the same size plate and the same rhythm and the same speed. So I had to have these markers to make me remember it, like that song, and that one's keyed into my healing or potions or using item thing.
That's so interesting, because I think a lot of people would assume that you map it to just thinking, press A, or, attack. But it's not that simple, right? You actually have to kind of really intensely think about something before your character even does anything.
Yeah, hopefully it does get to the point where that can happen, but that's way too refined. At least for me, at least for my knowledge and my use of it so far, that is way too easy. The reason why it's those sort of movement visualizations is because that causes the biggest change in your brain activity and the most visible change. And so, yeah, it's a real focus thing. And it was hard for me because I have various symptoms of ADHD. So me focusing and attention switching, and especially if you want to go from attacking one moment to healing the next, you have to focus, unfocus, turn it off, switch back on, spin. And it takes a lot of practice.
Well, yeah, I imagine with Elden Ring, you already have tons to think about, and then adding spinning plates on top of that sounds absolutely crazy.
God, Elden Ring by itself is so hard and a bit of a nightmare, let alone.
I mean, in terms of the game, right, there's so many kind of builds that you can go with Elden Ring. Imagine you had to find something that worked, purely using your brainwaves.
Yeah. I planned it out. I had a whole Word document of different kinds of ideas. One idea was to go for a full strength build, so just one big hit with a massive sword. So I didn't have to do it at all, just once, and then we're done. But in the end, I went for, well, it started out as a glass cannon mage, so barely any health, but a lot of attacks are kind of like that. But I went for just a mage because I realized that wasn't working. I was dying every single attempt. But the reason why is so that, like I said, and like you said as well, having to focus a lot and having to also block out distractions, because as I mentioned before with the visualizations, it has to be the same thing every single time. So if you've got a bunch of stuff spinning around on the screen, that's not the same thing. That's not the same thing you're thinking about. That's not the same thing you're doing. So the mage, the purpose of the mage is to be able to get a little bit of distance away from the battle, just a little bit, just for a moment, just so you can focus easier.
Gives
and
you
that's
a bit more kind of reaction time if you do need to get out of the way of something, like drink a potion or something.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's absolutely kind of incredible achievement. Obviously, you used the normal controller for the movements. So how comes was it that you had to use the controller for some things, but you could use your mind for others?
Well, the movement, I tried to use the EEG for everything and for the movement, but it was very, very complicated with that because of having to factor in reaction time and things like that. So dodging with the EEG, there's a bit of a delay between it picking up the signal and sending it through to the keybind, and also doing the correct pattern of brain activity, because that's what it does. It matches up the correct pattern of brain activity that you've trained it to remember. So you actually have to, you have to make your brain do that. And sometimes that can be a bit of a problem, and that can take a little bit of time, especially if you're not focused or you're distracted or accidentally doing the wrong thing. A lot of the time my plate is too big that I'm spinning, and so I don't heal. And I don't realize, and I don't know that's why.
No, come on, plate, spin.
My eyes going like this, I'm just crying on the inside. That's exactly what it is.
Okay, well, that explains the stern face that we were seeing in the clip earlier. I mean, I think starting with Elden Ring is like such a big ask. I mean, you could start with a nice simple game, but you kind of started with one that's infamously difficult anyway. So, I mean, what's next? Because surely anything else is going to be a breeze now.
Well, next is to get rid of the controller. So anything that comes afterwards, we probably won't jump straight back into Dark Souls with that mechanic, but we'll do something like Mario Kart or Super Smash Bros. That was my idea. And anything from this point on will be controller-less. So I think it's going to get a lot harder and a lot more of a challenge from this point on. And then hopefully in time for the Elden Ring DLC, I'll be practiced enough that it might be plausible to do it without a controller.
I mean,
that's the plan. That's the goal.
That sounds incredible. I mean, obviously, it's not as simple as just putting on this headset, right? You have to do all this kind of mapping. You already did it with all the different action buttons. So, I mean, even just the prep, surely that's going to take quite a bit of time, right?
A very, very long time, yeah. And it's it gets harder because for every single new input that you add, you have to train all the others back up again the same amount because it gets confused between them. So it's recognizing the difference between your normal pattern of brain activity, the one you've trained the first time, and then the one you've trained the other time, and then the difference between those two. And so you add a third, you've got to train them all again. If you add a fourth, you've got to train them all again, and it just becomes... It's possible. I mean... potentially you should be able to do up to 15.
15? Okay, well, I mean, any
15.
game in that case is possible. Well, look.
Easy, yeah.
Well, look, I look forward to see what you do next on your stream. Obviously, whatever you achieve, we have our fingers crossed. If you do it without the analog stick, then we'll be glad to have you back because we'll be insanely impressed. I'm hoping that maybe one day I can get my own set and I can kind of switch between the cameras just using my mind. I think that would be a lot of fun. But no, Perri, thank you so much for joining us today. A massive congratulations
so
again
much.
on your achievement. And yeah, all the best with your next game.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your
Wonderful.
day. Thank you for having me on.